an overview of the different sites that we are considering. So again, just kind of covered this, so what we're going to be talking about today, but a little bit more background into our station study process itself. So we started a little bit over a year ago, and we began by gathering data, looking at prior studies in the area, and in the corridor specifically, and looking at what passenger rail station studies have been done and route studies in the past, looking at what are the goals for the study, what are the station program elements that we're looking for, and then we also began with a corridor area evaluation, which is basically the general areas around existing track where we thought generally a station would work. So we started with 6 corridors around Madison. So we've now narrowed that down to 3 corridors, and then we've identified 8 sites within those 3 corridors that we're diving into right now. So that's where we are. And then in basically mid 2024 is what we're looking at to finalize the study. So later this spring, early summer, we'll come out with a recommended station site. And then we will also probably have sort of a plan B also baked in there, just because we may or may not have, issues arise when the station's ready for development where the initial recommendation doesn't work. So we'll build out a little bit more detail probably on a few of the sites, but we'll have one site that we are recommending as sort of the first choice. And then moving into 2024, later 2024 and beyond, we will continue to support the partners in the service development effort. So I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like first. So in December 2023, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation was awarded federal funding to do scoping and planning for 4 different routes in Wisconsin, which is for passenger rail enhancement and expansion. And so the route that Madison is planned to be on is that green line that you can see on the map there. So it would be an extension of the existing Hiawatha route, which currently runs between Chicago and Milwaukee. It's one of the most successful passenger rail lines in the country outside of the Northeast corridor. So very high ridership. They're seeing a lot of good rebound since COVID. And so looking at different ways that the state and Amtrak can work together to extend that route. One of those is through Madison and then eventually up to the Eau Claire, Twin Cities area. Another option is up to Green Bay. So that's another route they're considering. And I guess I should clarify, these aren't multiple options that they're gonna choose one. They're looking at doing all of these. So that's just I think an important point. And then they're also looking at what enhancements can be made between the existing Milwaukee to Chicago Hiawatha route and then along the existing what's called Twin Cities Milwaukee Chicago, which runs through La Crosse there. You can see in the red and blue there. So the state got that funding awarded in December. So they're going to be starting that work. They're working out the grant agreements with the Federal Railroad Administration to get that work going. And so what Madison is doing is trying to get our station site identified so that can essentially plug into this larger effort. And so we'll have a station site identified as part of this study, and we'll do some high level cost analysis, and we'll do a little bit more of a detailed site plan, but we won't get into design and engineering quite yet. We'll wait until this process gets a little bit further along. So a little bit more of what are we talking about when we are talking about a station? So what does that actually look like? So depending on maybe your experience with passenger rail, maybe you've seen big, grand, historic stations, and maybe you've seen small buildings that are sort of like next to railroad tracks and kind of hidden, very functional. But, we're looking at different options for what that could look like in Madison, but specifically we're looking at some kind of station building or a space within a larger building. That would be things for space for bathrooms, seating, some ticketing or information, and not a whole lot of programming is really needed specifically for the station use. But the bigger piece is the platform. So looking at about up to a 700-foot long platform. There's a few sites that the platform would not be able to be quite that long, but essentially what that is an elevated area along the track where people would be able to use to actually board the train itself. So the train would pull up to a platform and people would be able to walk onto the train. So that's a big part of the site selection is where can we make, where would there be room for that? And then also looking at a site that would allow for the necessary transportation access and circulation needs. So of course, meeting ADA requirements, but also just how are people getting to the station? How are they getting dropped off? If they're getting dropped off, how are they walking there? How are they biking there? Is there parking right on site or nearby? And all these kind of questions related to that. And then another piece is the potential for train layover and servicing, which may be needed here in Madison. So that could look like overnight train storage, light servicing, crew accommodations, or just a place where the train can sit for like 30 minutes and get quickly cleaned and turned over for the next route. And that in some cases can happen on one of the sites that we're considering, and then in other cases it would have to take place in another location. So the train would essentially serve the station, move to another location to do those things. So a little bit, we have to make some service assumptions in order to really try to identify a station location. So Wisconsin Department of Transportation this is what they're going to be working on when they do that planning. So they're going to refine this, but working with them and working with Amtrak, we are assuming something like 4 to 6 trains per day serving Madison, initially at least. Traditional passenger rail service, which is about 79 to 110 miles per hour in sort of the out of town stretches of rail. So the train wouldn't be running 79 to 110 in town, but that's basically the max speed that we're looking at. And the reason for that is there's a lot of different safety requirements once you start getting higher than that. So that's, the assumption based on what we understand, Amtrak and the state are looking at. The station and the service overall would have amenities that kind of match the existing Hiawatha. So things like onboard Wi-Fi, online ticketing, the same locomotives and train cars that are being used on that service would be used on this service. And another service assumption that is somewhat important to note, but we'll learn more about this as the Wisconsin DOT gets into their process, but generally, they are looking at sort of phasing and implementation of the extension of the Hiawatha to Madison. So essentially what that would look like is an initial extension to Madison with connections probably in a couple other communities along the route. They're looking at Watertown and then somewhere in western Waukesha County. And then ending in Madison initially, and then later doing that extension to the Twin Cities. So, some of the route might make a connection from the Twin Cities to Eau Claire first, for example, and then sort of come down and meet in Madison, and they'll figure all of that out. But I think it's just an assumption that we need to make in order to understand how the trains might move through Madison. Are they gonna end here and then go back to Milwaukee? Or are they gonna keep going? And I think generally the idea is initially they'll probably end here and go back, but eventually, ideally, going all the way to the Twin Cities. So one of the questions we get a lot are, who are the potential users of this? And Amtrak has told us that they see the users of this extension to be very similar to the folks that are using the Chicago to Milwaukee segment right now. So those tend to be business travelers and leisure travelers. Those make up the bulk of their ridership right now. With obviously an extension to Madison with the campus here, they see students and students' families being a big market for them. But then a smaller fraction would be commuters. So that's a question that comes up. Are these people commuting between Milwaukee and Madison? Not really. There probably could be a few of those folks, but more likely be more occasional business travel. And then of course, we're also looking at users being from all ages, abilities, and backgrounds, and trying to make the station located in a place that's not only, meeting those bare minimum ADA requirements, but being expansively accessible. So looking at all angles of accessibility. And then also the station location study is really, the biggest challenge with the study is balancing these different priorities. So of course we need to meet the train access and operational needs, and we need to accommodate those station program elements that I talked about. But we also need to make sure that it's feasible to either own, acquire, or control in some way for the station use. So a few of the sites we're looking at are owned by the city, but the majority of them are owned by some kind of private entity, which would require some kind of partnership. Again, details of that to be determined. But we have been meeting with property owners, of course, along for the different sites that we're considering. We're also looking at how do we minimize environmental impacts. One of the overall goals for this effort is for this to be an environmentally sustainable mode of transportation and projects. So the last thing we want to do is choose a site that's going to have negative environmental impacts to develop it. We want to maximize ridership, which can be, you know, you can look at that from a few different angles of how to actually do that. But also ensuring equitable access by both different population groups, different parts of the Madison area, and how are people accessing the station equitably, depending on what mode of transportation they're using. We also are looking at, is there an opportunity to capitalize on economic development potential here, depending on the site location. So at the end of the day, we're really looking at how do we cultivate the station as part of another great place in Madison. We don't want this station to be sort of an afterthought, a little building along a track. We want it to be part of something bigger, and that could mean part of a larger development where there's multiple uses within the same building, or it could mean kind of coupled with or coinciding with other activity generators that would just kind of be complementary to the use of the station. So jumping into the potential station sites, these are the evaluation criteria that we're using, pretty much matching along with what I described as those different priorities, kind of different data points that we're using to evaluate. And we will basically have a rating of these different evaluation criteria for each site. And another piece is, you know, land use and development that sort of goes along with complementary uses, what other uses are there today, and then also what's planned for the area in the future. So the potential station sites that we're looking at, again, sort of coupled into these general corridor areas, starting with the downtown, are a site at the Monona Terrace, Blair Street, Livingston Street, and Baldwin Street. I'm going to get into a little bit more details about all of these sites. And then the First Street corridor, so those red dots on the map, those are near the future Madison Public Market, and then across the street from that. And then up in the Oscar Mayer corridor. So looking at a couple of sites that are kind of part of the future, you know, that could be part of the future redevelopment of that area, and what, you know, could that look like as far as helping Madison have, you know, realize the vision for that area, which is redeveloping it into much more of a mixed use area with housing and commercial activity and things like that. So getting into a little bit of the numbers for each of the site locations, we start by looking at proximity to people. So how many people are within a half-mile walk, a 3-mile bike ride, or a 30-minute transit trip from the station? So starting with, you know, the downtown stations, you have a higher, you know, proximity to people in that area. There's just more people, more density. And then obviously moving out to the northeast area of this, you know, the sites that we're looking at, it does go down. So considering proximity and how does that impact ridership is one of the pieces that we're looking at. And then in a similar vein, looking at jobs, so proximity to jobs. And I think this is a good signal, not because we see a lot of commuters using the route, but for that business to business travel, for also just kind of a general signal of commercial activity around the different sites. And then we also got some data from Destination Madison to try to understand, you know, where are visitors going? Because, you know, it's not just about Madisonians using it and getting to those other communities, but it's about how are people getting, you know, where are they going when they come here if they're going to be using the service. So you can kind of just see a general pattern. Obviously, no surprise, there's a lot of destinations downtown. Of course, UW-Madison is a huge destination for visitors. There are some top visitor destinations out in the, you know, eastern part of the city as well, and the north side. So different things to consider there, but obviously proximity to those destinations is important because, you know, we want to, or we know that it needs to be really easy for visitors to get to those destinations when they get here if they're going to use the service. If they have to come in and use multiple modes of transportation that aren't convenient, it's going to be less likely that they're going to use this service. And then finally, for sort of the numbers breakdown, we have the proximity of hotels. So this specific visual just shows hotel rooms within a reasonable walk of potential station locations, which we used a half a mile, which is generous, but I think generally speaking is reasonable, especially if you're in a walkable area. So obviously Monona Terrace, Blair Street, Livingston Street, and the Baldwin Street sites all have access to some level of hotels, with Monona Terrace being the highest. And we do have some data we're gonna add to this. There's a few more hotels that are in development right now. So this graph will shift a little bit, but not dramatically different from what we're seeing. So a little bit of the overview of each site, and I'll talk kind of high level about our preliminary evaluations of each of them. So beginning with the Monona Terrace, so this site that we're looking at would be located basically as an extension of or an add-on to that Department of Administration building that you see right here. Let's see if my mouse will work, right here. And so then the platform would be along a rail line down here, and I'll show a little bit more of a conceptual site plan, but it would extend underneath this parking deck. So the parking deck would stay. We're not assuming impacts to Monona Terrace. We are on, we understand the proposals for the redevelopment of that area long-term, but for right now, for this, we're just considering no impacts to Monona Terrace directly, other than going underneath that parking deck. And so a general site plan for that area is shown here. And so you can kind of see that there would be a new passenger track that would come in. The platform would be in between the existing and the new track. And then this could either be as part of the existing building or probably more likely basically an extension of this building. So people would be able to access the station essentially from coming here. And then there would be a vertical circulation element that would be needed in order to get people from the higher level down to the track platform. Parking for this area, there wouldn't be parking accommodated directly on site, but folks would be able to use nearby public parking garages, and we would, develop agreements for folks to use those. Well, internally, we would develop those agreements within the city, but for overnight parking. And a couple of the challenges with this site are, just the geometry of that area right under the terrace. It's a tight space. Construction could be challenging, but we do think it's feasible. And then another challenge is that kind of access by automobile. So if people need to get, let's say they need or want to get dropped off, that's going to be a little bit tricky here. But a lot of opportunities with this site, with proximity to so many, places to go, so many existing people, population in the area, jobs in the area, and just I think the overall ability for people to kind of get out of the station and walk out and be so close to the Capitol Square is a big important factor. Another site nearby is the Blair Street site. So this is the site of the current Gateway Mall site. And so the concept for this site would be that this site could either be developed kind of as a site within this existing development, but more likely a redevelopment of this site. And so as many of you may be aware, this site is being redeveloped right now. So generally, the thought process is this area would be redeveloped at some point. And so, maybe a station could be part of that. So that's kind of how we're showing it. Again, very high level conceptual diagram here, but that the station would be part of a larger new development. The platform would come in here with a new passenger track extending kind of, as you can see in this red line here. One of the challenges with this site is that the Blount Street intersection would be blocked when the train is serving the station. So different options would have to be considered for that. How do you address that? You could do it with a grade separated crossing or close it, or maybe there's another option. And then what else with the site? I think just overall that this site is great from another great site from a proximity perspective. It's a little bit closer to some of those destinations along East Wash versus the Monona Terrace site. Great multimodal access. The Capital City Trail comes in here, so that would have to be integrated into the site. And how do those connections work? But this could be an opportunity for kind of a larger redevelopment which the station would be a part of. Another site we're looking at is Livingston Street. So this site, an opportunity with this site is there's a lot of room for a platform here, but the station could be located, really anywhere along this strip here. We're sort of showing it in this corner, but that again is very preliminary with the platform along the track here. And then just again, kind of a high level idea of what this could look like. And I mean, we don't know what the future of the overall site here looks like, but it is, it is another challenge here with the potential for this, for Livingston Street intersection to be blocked. But we do have that public garage right there, the Livingston Street parking garage, which could provide parking for folks overnight easily, and also good proximity and access here. Not quite as strong as the Blair Street and Manonas Terrace sites, but still definitely very much within kind of a lot of that activity for businesses and visitors and things like that. The Baldwin Street site. So this is a site that would actually be an extension of McPike Park, which you can kind of see in this aerial right here. It currently houses warehouse buildings, but it is owned by the city of Madison. So this site, kind of has that opportunity going for it. The plan for this is, again, an expansion of the park. So the station could be part of that. It's a little bit of a different use for a station, but potentially, interesting to have it as part of a park. Some of the challenges here would be, the land use is a little mixed. So you've got commercial areas to the north, but then you've got, to the west, and then you've got, to the east and north, you've got more of a residential area. So, how well does that mesh with a, passenger rail station? I think that's part of what we'll evaluate. Also, there is a pedestrian crossing that currently goes over the tracks that would be blocked when the train is serving the area. So that's something that would have to be looked at. This site also would only be able to accommodate a 450-foot platform. So again, that's just another consideration of, what might make sense for the site. And there is some train operational challenges here, just the way the tracks come in here and having it be basically having the train stop on a switch. So what does that look like, and how, is that something that will work here? Excuse me, there we go. Okay, and so now moving up to the First Street area. So this is the site of the future Madison Public Market. So the concept here is that the station would actually be right on that site, but as a separate building, and then potentially having, maybe parking over here, or maybe there's another redevelopment where there's parking that could be shared. That would have to be discussed if the site moves forward, but that's just kind of how we're showing it preliminarily here. I've heard a lot of people say, maybe that, surface parking isn't the best use for that site right there, but maybe there is an opportunity to share parking with other development here if there isn't enough parking on that site to accommodate the station, which we don't think there will be. So an opportunities with this site is it's owned by the city of Madison. It is, I think could be an interesting complementary use with the public market. And then a couple of challenges with this site are the curve there. It's not necessarily ideal to stop on a curve, which is why we're showing this. Well, I should say we wouldn't expect to stop on a curve, but we would build a new passenger track that would be straight in this area to serve the platform, which would require a shorter platform, again, looking at about 400 feet. And what that would mean is basically that the train would come in, stop at the platform, and only certain cars would be served, which is pretty typical. It's not atypical for smaller stations to have that characteristic where only certain cars are served. And basically what would happen is folks would just move within the cars to access the platform. So instead of just getting right out the door of their car, they would just have to move forward or backward to do that. The Johnson Street site. So this is the site kind of right in that area of the First Street future Madison Public Market. But again, envisioning this as a potential for a future redevelopment of this area, which is generally planned by the city in our comprehensive plan. So looking at, this general area, I should say, is kind of planned for more mixed use. redevelopment. And so looking at this, again, conceptually, possible redevelopment and having the station be a part of that. So this is an example where kind of from a rail operations perspective, it works nicely. You are able to kind of fit that full 700-foot platform there. You could potentially service the train on site because this area over here is a rail yard. So there might be an opportunity for that to kind of work well, depending on, you know, what the development is in the surrounding area. But again, just kind of part of a bigger mixed use redevelopment. And then moving up to Oscar Mayer, the Commercial Ave site is currently vacant, but there is a couple of different developments that are basically in progress right now in this area. So not on this site, there is a development proposed for that site, but then there are multiple housing, multifamily and senior housing developments occurring in this area. So something to consider, and whether or not that's complementary. In some cases it is, in some cases, you know, depending on, you know, the details of the site may not necessarily be complementary for this site. So we're working through what that might mean for this site location, but it does provide a lot of room for a large platform. Some other challenges for the site would be that we'd be looking to enhance a connection to the bus rapid transit station that's planned nearby. This site isn't quite as walkable, bikeable, accessible by transit as some of the other ones. So another thing to consider is how do we make those changes to make that happen. Again, this site we are kind of showing as a standalone building, but I think any of the sites we would, you know, consider, you know, what are the surrounding buildings? Is there other, you know, redevelopment that could coincide here? And then finally, the Aberg site. So this site is the site at the former North Transfer Point by Metro. And this site, you know, again, we're looking at more of a shared use, multi-use redevelopment with potential for shared use parking. But again, this site, similar to the Commercial Avenue site, would probably need some enhancements as far as multimodal accessibility, improving those connections to the BRT station that would be planned for Packers Avenue, and then more opportunity for parking on site, I think, here, which is another opportunity up in this area, as well as the potential to just, again, kind of encourage more economic development in this area, which is part of why this area is being considered. Also, both of these sites, I should say, the Oscar Mayer corridor and the First Street site work nicely from a train operations perspective, because the train could basically come in from Milwaukee, and with the future extension to Minneapolis, essentially just kind of turn up and head up north, in comparison to the downtown sites where the train would come in and then actually kind of change directions, go out the other way, and then eventually go up. A couple of things we've heard kind of from Amtrak and WSDOT on that is, you know, depending on who you talk to, that's maybe not that big of a concern. Part of the idea is, you know, the train's already coming to Madison, so coming an extra 10 minutes to come downtown isn't maybe that big of a concern, because if your concern is to get from Chicago to Minneapolis, you're probably going to take the other route that's more direct. So if you're coming to Madison, it probably just makes sense. Well, I shouldn't say it probably makes sense, but there isn't a strong argument for not coming downtown because of the timing. So then the route planning and service development timeline overall. So we're looking at the potential to have this station open to service around the 2030-2031 timeframe. So that is, you know, if the corridor scoping and corridor planning process move forward on the schedule that Wisconsin DOT is looking at, then they could potentially enter corridor development in 2026 or 2027. So that would allow a couple more years for that, which would be more of the detailed design, engineering, and then the design and construction the following few years after that. So what that would be is both design and construction of like this Madison station, but then also other improvements. So the route would run on existing tracks, but there might be some improvements that would be needed to make for those tracks to serve passenger rail, because right now they might serve freight, but for freight, it's not as important that you have a smooth track or a track that can run a certain speed, you know, as much as we'd be looking at for passenger rail service. So what's next for our project here, for our study, is that we are looking at collecting public feedback. Right now, we had a couple of meetings in late January and early February. And so we're accepting public feedback on these 8 sites through February 29th. And then we will continue meeting with various stakeholders such as yourselves and other groups to get more feedback and refine those evaluations. We're working through meeting with all the property owners again that own the different sites to try to get a better feel for what the potential is, and then identify a draft recommendation in that spring, summer timeframe with a more detailed site plan, some cost estimates, things like that. And then we would be coming back out to the public with that as a draft recommendation before we finalize it. So there will be another opportunity for people to see what we're proposing, provide feedback one more time, and then we would make that recommendation. And hopefully, you know, be able to find other ways to support the overall effort to keep it moving. So that concludes what I have for today. I'm happy to answer any questions. There's also opportunities where I can share like our link for our public comment form, or you can reach me at that email address as well to provide any feedback.
I mean, it's a pretty sweet email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't make it up, but I like it.
Well, Liz, thank you. Thank you from downtown Madison again. Liz, this has been great to work with. We're in constant communication. We very much appreciate it. I should just level set for everyone to know that DMI is an organization that's within our strategic plan, that we zealously are supportive of passenger rail and the expansion of passenger rail into the Madison market. And it's a position of the Transportation Committee, I don't know, Morgan, maybe a year ago or so, to say that we just wanted the station as close to downtown as possible, but also importantly connected to already fixed transportation, right? So potentially BRT, so it makes a seamless connection wherever that is. We recorded this, so this is available. So there, are we able to share your slide deck as well? Okay, so I will send the slide deck out to both committees, so you have that information at your disposal. If anyone has any questions, though, please do let me know, and we can make sure to contact Liz, or you can just use that super cool email, amtrak@cityofmadison.com. So we have time for questions.
Yes, we have some questions online. Does anybody?
I was just going to ask a quick question, Liz, about parking. Especially the downtown sites don't have much parking around it, you know, directly adjacent. So what is ideal? You know, that you want to have 100 stalls, or what's typical, I guess?
Yeah, we're digging into that a little bit right now, but it's somewhere in the 100 to 200 stall sort of ballpark. So we're figuring out exactly what that looks like. And I think it also could depend on the site a little bit. But generally speaking, for the downtown sites, we would be depending on other nearby parking. And so understanding, you know, what does the walk look like? We just to give Monona Terrace as an example, we were just down there visiting that site earlier this week. And we, you know, walked from the Madison Municipal Building, right, you know, kitty corner right across the street there. And the Wilson Street garage is right there. So I actually don't think that site, I think the idea was that site was going to be pretty challenging with parking, but I think with the Wilson Street garage so close, that probably is a good fit. And even having used the Milwaukee station several times, there is an on-site, they have a surface parking lot there, but I think the walk is about the same, you know, from the surface parking lot in Milwaukee to the front door of the station. Yeah, it might be shorter because the front door of the station is, you know, a little bit of a hike. It's not bad, but I think, yeah. So basically, you know, we'd have to figure out exactly what that looks with the capacity of the Wilson Street garage and how does overnight parking work, but it would just have to be structured to kind of make sense. But I think, you know, that is less of a problem. It might be a perception challenge. So getting people to understand quite how close it is and how easy it would be to park. I think maybe more so would potentially be ADA parking and then drop-offs and pickups. So, you know, what are the requirements for accommodating ADA parking on site, and how do the drop-offs and pickups work for that? So we have to just kind of work through that and understand more.
Liz, just following up on that, Garrett Olson here from Madison Adventure Tours, would like above like a skywalk type option be something that could be considered there? I'm having trouble picturing exactly what it looks like, but
yeah, that's an interesting
just getting across the street.
Yeah, I don't think that has been brought up yet, but that's definitely an interesting concept. And speaking with the state about the Department of Administration buildings, they do have you know, there might be some challenges there with public access to that building, and so I think that would have to be worked out. It would probably have to be pretty separated from the office use of that building if that building continues to be used as an office, which we expect that it will be for right now at least. But yeah, that is definitely an interesting concept.
Jay Firm?
Hi, Liz. My name's Jay Firm. At the end, you spoke something about the, if the site was downtown, that the train would have to back out. And I know that's in the past, that's been a big criticism, but I think that you just said that anybody who's going on to the Twin Cities is probably taking another route. So are we to interpret that as that is a less, that de-emphasizes that criticism of the downtown sites?
So that's basically what we've heard from Amtrak, is that they're not as concerned about that. We've heard from Amtrak that, well, first of all, they've said any site in Madison is gonna be a good site. They're very excited about Madison. But, you know, they understand how people are gonna use those routes. And I think generally the idea is that if you're on that route, you're probably you're either leaving to or coming from Madison. So it's probably not as big of a concern. There's always the chance that you do have people continuing on, but more likely it's more of that connection to the Chicago, Milwaukee area and to the Minneapolis, Eau Claire area to and from Madison. So I think that's generally what they said. And not to get too technical, but basically how it would work is that the train locomotive would actually switch from a push to a pull. So it wouldn't necessarily be like the train has to turn around, but basically it would switch directions. The conductor would walk from one end to another. It is done in a lot of places, and just move it in the other way, in the other direction, out basically of the isthmus, and then continue either north, or could continue in that way all the way back to Milwaukee and Chicago.
I think just to clarify too, to maybe add on what Jay's saying, we've heard in the transportation committee that a couple of years ago, before you came on, there was concern about doubling back from Amtrak. We heard that directly from Amtrak when a run was at Amtrak. And they were not making that decision in California and a few other places. It sounds like that has changed. So I think that's clear, just to be clear.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Liz. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, outside of the stations where the passenger train would share track with freight rail? And are there benefits of certain stations? And just in general, we always hear about, you know, passenger trains getting delayed because the freight train gets first dibs on the track. And you mentioned there's a couple of different companies that you might know track along the way.
Yeah, so that is kind of standard operations for passenger rail in the United States, is that it is shared. And that does happen sometimes, that trains do get delayed because of freight trains. But I will say that talking with the railroad companies directly in the Madison area with the stations, we haven't heard anything specifically about certain stations being more disadvantageous because of that, or challenges related to that. I think overall, relatively speaking, there's not a ton of freight traffic right now. Of course, that could change. But compared to some of the other communities, even in Wisconsin, that they, serve passenger rail and freight, it is a little bit lower, not super highly used. But part of the thing that we're doing to, work with the rail lines or the railroad companies is that passenger rail siding that you saw on the different diagrams. So basically it would allow the passenger train to pull off of the main line to serve the station, so it wouldn't be sitting in the way of potential freight trains coming through. So that's another consideration. And then when they do the service development plan, they might look at other sidings. So maybe just having different opportunities for some passing to happen along the route if there is an area where it's heavily used. So
I think to be fair, there's only ever passenger rail when you're running late for a meeting.
yeah.
Or I'm sorry, freight, when you're running
Yeah,
late
freight
for a
when you're-
meeting.
yeah.
Mhm. Yes, Pam.
Hi, Liz, Pam Christensen, nice to meet you. So related to that, and I apologize if I missed it in the presentation, do we know about how many cars that this will be? And I guess I'm guessing not a ton, not like freight. So I'll let you answer that first.
Yep, that's correct. That's a correct assumption. So it's much shorter than freight. It's about 6 to 8 cars,
Okay,
about 680 feet is basically what we're looking at for the length of a train. So just to put that into comparison, freight trains, as some of you probably know, can be up to 2 miles long.
Yep.
So when you are at, if you're a driver at an intersection where the train is passing through, it's, basically a blink of an eye in comparison to,
And I
you know,
think
the
that
freight
that's gonna
train.
be an important message for DMI to get out, and, hopefully the city is getting that as well, because if you've been following this on social media at all, that's people like, why would you bring it downtown? It's gonna be creating an even bigger traffic snarl than we already have. So I think just that we're not gonna be sitting there for the 2 mile, which I do hit almost every time I come to.
Yeah, I know, and when I said it, they're not heavily used freight lines, I always say relatively, because when you're sitting in front of a train, it feels like that is. But, comparatively speaking, it's not overwhelmingly used where it would be a huge congestion issue.
Chuck Strausser, I'm gonna have you ask your question, but before we do, I just wanna note that Graham Fauci wrote in the chat, the Sheridan Web Crafters plant on Fordham Ave looks like it'll be available soon. It could be a great option. True. Chuck, go ahead.
Thanks. I live on the Isthmus and I have neighbors that express the same concern that's already been brought up about the passenger trains causing congestion. And you've already answered the question about how many cars there are and how long they are, but I guess I was curious, you mentioned earlier that they're not going to go 79 to 110 miles an hour through the Isthmus. How fast are they going to go through the Isthmus?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I don't have a very specific answer to that yet, and I don't know that we'll know that until WSDOT gets through their transit development plan. I would say not a lot faster than vehicular traffic, but I guess I don't want to speak out of turn not knowing what that would exactly look like. But I do know that, because of the crossings, they can't just speed through here at, let's say, 110 miles an hour, like that just wouldn't happen. But yeah, I would think it would, it wouldn't necessarily be like 10 miles an hour either, so.
I think freight's under 40.
Under 40, okay, that sounds right, okay.
Online, another question from John Tucker, is there a tax impact?
Right now, we aren't assuming that. I think the overall construction and development of the whole system would require a local match of some sort, which would be probably could be part of multiple different sources. So that could be from state, it could be from multiple local governments. The development of the station itself here in Madison could be part of that local match. But I think, we would be looking at a variety of funding options, and we don't see the ongoing operation of the station to be heavily, cost effective, prohibitive, I should say. Amtrak will, reimburse for part of that. And then, I think the city right now, we're looking at different models of what that could look like. So in some cases, stations are owned by the cities themselves, but in some cases they're owned by, quasi public-private partnerships and funded through different, kind of mechanisms. So I think we're looking at just different models for what that looks like right now.
Okay, great.
Quick question, this has probably come up because it's been talked about for years. Is there any anticipated duration for what the train would take to get from Madison to Milwaukee? Obviously, it's going to depend on all the specifics, but I mean, ballpark.
Yeah,
What's a trip?
I think ballpark about an hour and a half. So I would say it's similar to what you're seeing driving. So the idea is that it's competitive with driving, but it's probably not going to be faster than driving because the train will be making a couple of stops. But that's kind of, again, ballpark at what they're looking at. If they can get up to 110 on some of those stretches, between here, that would definitely help, I think, make that more competitive.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about that just from a transportation, like behavioral standpoint. Cost, convenience, and time are usually the three key factors in how we choose to get somewhere. So like, how much is it gonna cost, for example, to get to Milwaukee to Madison?
So I think I don't have the answer to that. I can say that right now, I think a ticket on the Hiawatha between Milwaukee and Chicago can run anywhere from like $25 to $40, depending on the time of day, the week, time of the week. So I would expect something in that ballpark, but you're right. I think a big factor here is convenience. So, we have to think about how are we making, this very, very convenient for people to use. I think another piece of why passenger rail is attractive for people is that it's relaxing. You can work on the train, you can sit back, you don't have to sit in traffic, you don't have to worry about, you know, driving, let's say here between here and Milwaukee on 94. So that is kind of, you know, helps shift the scales a little bit, but you're right, and it's not gonna be something everyone's gonna wanna do. It's not like all of a sudden everyone coming to, you know, Madison from Milwaukee is gonna be jumping on the train. But, you know, how can we make it more convenient, more attractive to people by making it something that is affordable and something that's more of, I think another piece is just more of an experience for especially for those leisure travelers, and making it part of the overall travel experience is, I think, a piece that people like about passenger rail. And then parking, I mean, I think one of the reasons people use the Chicago to Milwaukee train a lot is because it's a pain to park, you know, and Chicago and Madison's not Chicago. So, you know, what do we, you know, how do we make it more attractive? You know, how do we spin that a little bit more to make it more convenient? So just, yeah, different things.
But some people might use the train Milwaukee, Chicago because the parking's so bad.
Absolutely.
If the parking's really good here, more
Absolutely.
people would drive.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so we have to make it more convenient for people to use the train, I think.
Yeah.
You know, we have to make it more attractive, then maybe they have to make it in Chicago, because Chicago is more like, how do I avoid driving and parking in Chicago, where we don't have as much of that issue here.
Great, I'm gonna, we could do one more.
Quick follow-up to that, because, so my friends on the west side, I live on the far west side, connection between the newly coming BRT from the far west side to the train station. Sure, that's been thought about. Are all these stations kind of in line with that, or some better than others?
Yeah, so if you're coming from the west side, the stations through the downtown and the First Street stations would be within walking distance of a BRT station that you'd be able to get on from the west side and get directly to. And then the two Oscar Mayer stations would require a transfer to the north-south BRT. So depending, I guess, on where exactly you'd be coming from the east side or from the west side. But all of the stations are within walking distance of either under construction or planned BRT station, which I think is really important and just ups that convenience factor, because if someone can walk, you know, they can see and walk to a BRT station that looks, you know, like an attractive place to wait. It looks like it's something easy they can figure out. They don't have to, like, you know, page through some kind of a schedule to understand when is it coming, how do I use this? They can tap a credit card or they can tap an app. And I think that really does make it a lot more likely that people will use that as a transfer versus, you know, just the regular bus, you know, a regular bus route, which may be a little bit confusing for people. They don't know when it's coming or where it's going or how frequently it's going to be served. So yeah, that's a big factor though.
Can I just make a quick comment? I live in Oconomowoc, and I don't know, 12, 15 years ago, they were talking about this same topic going back and forth. Oconomowoc was one of the stops at that time, but where I live, there's so much cross utilization for it. I'm in the middle of Madison and Milwaukee. I can take it to sales calls in Milwaukee. I can commute to Madison. I can do leisure both ways. But the good thing about it, to your point, was I spend 2 hours a day of time on the road. I can be working that whole time if I take the train. And when I go to Chicago all the time on sales calls, that gave me an hour and a half to work versus driving and paying for parking. So there's a lot of really good aspects, you know, to having this come here.
Well, that actually was gonna be my last question, then I'll turn it over to Morgan to help close out. But if, for those of us who want to support this, what is our most effective way to advocate for it at this point?
Yeah, I think at this point, you know, we've gotten a lot of support from DMI for the effort, and I think, you know, we'll be looking for letters of support at different points in the project. I think generally this is an interesting project because everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, it is, but it is very popular. A lot of people are very excited about this. It's more of a discussion of where should the station be, but you can provide us comments on that, I think is great. And, you know, if we have, we're going to be looking, for example, for approval of the study from the city's transportation commission and the council. but we won't necessarily be asking them to vote on funding or anything right now. So from that regard, we're not quite there yet, but we'll definitely be in touch, when we do get to some of those bigger decision points. I think a big decision point is obviously where the station recommendation is gonna be, but yeah.
Amy, can
Morgan?
I ask one quick question? Is DMI gonna take a public position on a preferred station location?
That's an open question that these two committees will be discussing. Yeah, for sure. We have been in consultation already. Certainly, we've already made, our current statement is that we want it to be as close to downtown as possible and connected to existing or planned transit options. And so will we have to refine that potentially? Absolutely. And then the board knows that as well. Yeah, thank you.
Morgan, any last words?
No, thank you so much for the time and presentation, for everyone for joining. There will be certainly more to come on this. As Jason said, make sure to join us next week for the What's Up Downtown Breakfast, Transportation Committee on March 8th, and Economic Development on March 21st. Did I get that date right?
Wow, good
Right,
job.
good job.
Better than I am.
Jason?
John,
Thank you, everyone.
thank you. Yes, we'll see you all soon. I will send the presentation out to everyone. We also have an interesting presentation from Mike Checkball about the construction of PRT that I'll also send out to everybody. It was a video recording from this Monday. So lots of things happening in transportation. Thank you for your support of downtown. Thank you for your support of DMI. We'll be in touch soon. And Liz will be here for a few more minutes too with questions for those in the room. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.